Good afternoon. I'm Peter Garred.
And I'm Maria Monteferrante. Welcome to Montreal Inside Out. Part of the skill of being an efficient computer operator is having a quick and alert mind, ready to respond easily to the information on the computer screen. But how would you go about that if you were blind? We'll show you the answer when we visit some visually impaired people overcoming their handicaps to take part in the computer age.
And later on, we pick up a pair of tickets to board a Murray Hill tour bus to find out what it is that attracts those summer visitors to our city. We get it all underway after this. Up next, the new computer users. Welcome back to Montreal Inside Out. In an era marked by rapid technological changes, specialized skills are increasingly important in the labor market. Maria?
For many people, the word computerization creates visions of robots, readouts, and printed messages. But for those who are visually impaired, the world of computers is often specifically designed for those who can see. That is, until now, as we visit a Concordia University computer programming class for the blind.
The weekly Cubs meeting at the Montreal Association for the Blind is a unique experience. Besides developing skills and a sense of discipline, visually impaired and sighted boys learn how to work and play together. They also learn how to serve their community and deal with responsibilities. Being visually impaired or being sighted does not matter when you're a Cub at the Montreal Association for the Blind. What's important is forming a good team when it's time to work or play. Beyond all this learning and fun is a two-way social integration. The classroom environment provides another educational experience for the visually impaired. Material taught in class helps them to develop reading, spelling, and writing skills. Under the supervision of their teacher, these children are learning Braille. The number and position of dots in one unit, called a Braille cell, form letters or other symbols. These 6 dot-based configurations are memorized and applied in exercises done on Braille writers. Another device, the Visual Tech, is used to reproduce printed characters on a larger scale. Braille writers and Visual Tech are some of the tools that help these children to become literate. In 1982, responding to the increasing importance of computer literacy, a joint venture between the Montreal Association for the Blind and Concordia University led to the first computer course for the visually impaired in Montreal. The equipment includes the latest state-of-the-art technology, such as a computer with a speech synthesizer, transforming print input into audio output. What is the content of the course? What does it teach?
The contents of the course, we say, has 3 different parts. In one part, we explain the use of computers and how the computers function. So you can call this as more like a computer literacy in particularly about microcomputers. The second part is the principles of programming, which we teach. For teaching programming, we use essentially the language called BASIC. And the third part of the course contents can be said as the learning of use of special equipment used by the blind.
One of the goals of the course is to provide students with the opportunity to develop marketable skills, and with this expertise enable them to seek employment in the labor market. Jim Bergeron was already working at Dominion Textile when he became blind. He had to leave for a rehabilitation period. A year and a half later, he was rehired by the same company. Jim, what does your work involve here at Dominion Textiles?
I'm a computer programmer here. I work in the management information systems. I work with a group of people who help maintain that system. The people here, management, have to see some type of reports, and what we do here is maintain the programming that give them those reports.
This case is an example of successful reintegration into the labor market. No physical changes in the working environment were necessary to accommodate his needs. The cost of training a new programmer was eliminated. The only expense incurred was that of a talking terminal.
Hi, Chama. My name is Snoopy, and I am a bacteria.
The decision of Dominion Textile was not dictated by Bill 9 with regard to the hiring plan of l'Office des Personnes Handicapées du Québec. Jacques Sanson, the company's manpower manager, speaks about the importance of a spontaneous line of communication between employer and employee.
First of all, I guess you've got to be natural about it up to a certain point. It's got to come easily. Therefore, you've got to know a bit more about handicapped people. There is good information sessions that are available to that. Also, manpower centers have some programs that could help us doing that. The trust should be into the environment as far as co-workers or physical environment. Also the ability to go back to the handicapped person and ask them what they're able to do. They know it an awful lot better than we do. And they're surprising. Sometimes they're able to do things that we don't even dream about.
The work of Dr. Robert Lambert, professor of psychology at Concordia, is an example of the use of computer literacy by a visually impaired person in another field, scientific research.
We have two ways in which we're applying the computer at the moment. In one project, we're studying the logics that people use in day-to-day reasoning, and the computer helps us to analyze whether the conclusions they draw and the judgments they make are logically valid or not. And in another project, we're trying to study how blind people conceptualize geographical layouts by mental maps. Since blind people can't draw pictures of their mental maps, we are now allowing them to talk to the computer and let the computer draw the maps for us.
From braille writers to talking computers, future improvements include less expensive hardware devices and the development of voice input for those who can't use the keyboard. This technology should enable visually impaired persons to be seen as productive computer users and bring them one step closer towards ceasing to be among the forgotten people in our society.
Welcome back. My guest today is Mr. Leo Bissonnette, who is the Coordinator of Special Projects for the MAB and the Research and Activity Coordinator for the Quebec Federation of the Blind. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Can you tell us about your personal involvement with the computer course at Concordia?
A year ago, when the course was first conceived by Ann Kirby and Professor Krishnan of Concordia University, they realized that they would need agency support from individuals who were qualified in the areas of computers.
Mm-hmm.
So the MAB was involved in the project, and I became the liaison person between Concordia and the Montreal Association for the Blind in this project.
This was at the beginning of the conception of the course, or are you still doing that work?
I am more involved now than I ever was. As projects begin to grow, one takes on more and more responsibility, and now I am the instructor of the course.
You're actually teaching the course.
I'm teaching the course.
How do you adapt it to the specific students' needs? Each student must be completely different.
Certainly, you have to do a great deal of adaptation in terms of the presentation of the material in the classroom. Given that, for the most part, we deal with a group of visually impaired individuals, we have to present the material without the use of the blackboard.
Mm-hmm.
So it means preparing diagrams, programs, handouts in a media that is more acceptable to them. In other words, braille or tape.
I see.
The professor in the classroom has to present the material, the concepts, without the use of the blackboard. So it's a constant presentation of audio material.
Mm. The equipments that are used, though, they're standard equipment for all the students?
We have two forms of voice output and braille output that we use in the classroom. I've brought into the studio an example of braille output.
So what exactly does this do?
I have here a braille terminal that enables a student to enter information through the use of this particular Braille keyboard, which is a standard Braille keyboard that the students have become familiar with.
That would take the place of the normal keyboard.
Yes. And through this particular device, we are able to present material to the computer for analysis and receive material from the computer for student input.
I see. And all equipment is the same? What other types of equipment are there?
We have voice output capability.
That would mean eliminating this?
This is, some students do not know Braille, and for those students we have the capability of providing a voice-assisted interaction with the computer. In other words, the material does not come through the screen, it comes through a voice unit.
And they can communicate with the computer on voice?
They communicate
through voice?
They communicate through voice. And when we mean voice, we mean that they enter the keys using the standard keyboard. The keyboard echoes back the keys, giving them some sense of what they have typed in. In other words, if for example, one types an A, one immediately hears that A come back at them through the Votrax, the voice unit.
I see. What, there are some students who have taken the course and they've taken some practical applications. How do you see the course being used? Besides the job market, the labor market, are there other applications?
Today, people are using computers in the home. Some of our individuals have purchased units that enable them to access databases such as CompuServe. This is a particular database that enables one to access newspapers. And through this particular database, one is able to have, using this unit that I have here in the studio with me, for example, Braille output provided.
In their own homes?
In their own home. So again, access to information is made much easier and extremely quick.
For the future, where is this going to be going? I know that right now there's this type of organization to start a users group. Can you explain that?
We have a group in place designed to bring together visually impaired users of computers in order that they can become familiar with up-to-date improvements in software and hardware. And given that changes are constantly taking place in this particular sector at this time, this kind of information provision is extremely important. It also brings together the manufacturers through an organization so that they can receive input from the users themselves, and in this way they're able to improve the product that they sell.
To better suit the needs of the handicapped people.
That's right. It's a constant interaction between all individuals in the field.
Right now this is local.
This is local, but given that many organizations across Canada are doing the same kind of thing, we can certainly see a day when some kind of national body will be created to link this kind of activity.
I see. So right now there's a local users group, and eventually it will be linked on do you see that's going national and also possibly going into the States?
Yes, I can.
I see. What are the future plans for Concordia?
We have two plans at the moment. We will introduce a course in word processing, as well as provide students who take computer science with computer-assisted tutorial instruction.
I see. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. And my guest today was Mr. Leo Bissonnette, and we'll be back with more right after this. Up next, a tourist's view of the city. The official tourism season is a few months away, and with it some thousands of visitors clad with Nikons and one-steps will capture our city in a variety of ways.
The bus tours are one way of going about Montreal that combines both transportation and guidance into a crash course of the city's landmarks. In our next segment, we'll show you what goes on in these buses and the kinds of people they attract. But first, we suggest you review your definition of a tourist by joining us for a short quiz featuring Montrealers.
Right here? All right. Notre Dame Street.
Notre Dame. It's down there, I think.
La Fontaine Park? I don't know that.
We often think we know our city very well. That's until we find ourselves unable to identify a building or a street. While familiar with our working areas and certain districts, we tend to forget the Montreal's historical, geographical, and cultural aspects. Did you know that these few questions could be answered by anyone who spends less than a day in Montreal? Murray Hill and Montreal's Transit Commission both offer guided city tours and its highlights. We took a tour to see what Montreal has to offer. Why don't you join us? There are a variety of bus tours departing from Dominion Square daily. They vary in length from a 2.5-hour tour of the city to an 8.5-hour excursion into the surrounding countryside.
Hi, girls. The mother. I thought that you were the mother. He is the Holy Father. I know the Ontario. You're also the father. Now, where are you from? New York. So we owe the other ones. So I have Americans, Canadians.
Our first stop, Église Notre-Dame, Notre Dame Church. From there, along Expo site, along Olympic site. You know the place where we have the Olympic Stadium? The place where we're going to teach the Americans how to play baseball this year? I said something wrong? From there to the top of the Montreal Mountain, to the Canadian Historical Museum, to the St. Joseph Shrine, through back to downtown of Montreal, hoping to be back here before midnight tonight. We're going to start that tour by, on the right side here, a cenotaph, and that's in memories of the soldiers who lost their lives during the First and the Last World War. Across the street on the right side, coming up right in the corner, the monument of Bishop Bourget. This bishop was responsible for the constructions of the only cathedral in Montreal here on the right side, Mary Queen of the World Cathedral. Same styles and same architecture than the one in St. Peter in Rome, except this is 1/3 of the size of St. Peter in Rome. The 13th statue that we can see on top of that portico, that's the patron saint of the first 13 parish here in Montreal.
Originally founded by Paul Chamonix de Maisonneuve in an effort to Christianize the Indians in 1642, Montreal later became a thriving inland port. Today, strict zoning laws and restoration projects ensure all Montreal's preservation. Notre Dame Church, erected by the Sulpicians in 1829, is among the largest churches in North America. Place Jacques-Cartier, with its sidewalk cafes, street musicians, and clubs, is one of the centers of Montreal nightlife. But at one time, this was a bustling marketplace overflowing with goods and fresh produce.
In front of that city hall, coming up on the right side here, Le Château de Ramsay, the Ramsay Castle. It used to be the home of the 11th governor of Montreal, Claude de Ramsay, and after the home of Benedict Arnold and Benjamin Franklin. Today, that's an historical museum. And you know that Canada, which is the second largest country in the world after Russia, we are only 24 million here. We can say, I think this is what put Montreal on the map.
Since the '76 Olympic Games, the stadium and the village complex have become easily recognizable Montreal landmarks. While the stadium is home to major league sports, the pool and the surrounding parks provide recreational space for everyone. Montreal bus tours offer an impressive collage of Montreal's historic landmarks. They journey through 400 years of historical development in one afternoon, tracing Montreal's growth from its origins to the city it is today. For Montreal Inside Out, this is Tony DeRay.
My guest today is Mr. John Arruda, who's a public relations representative for Murray Hill. John, welcome to Montreal Inside Out.
Thank you.
The bus tours in Montreal are leaving from Dominion Square, and there's, I don't know, 7 or 8 of them, I believe.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about them in general?
We have the basic city tours that we do. There's 3 basic city tours. One is 2.5 hours, one is 3 hours, and 3.5 hours. And we have one that is 4 hours long. It's geared to people who come into town and don't necessarily have that much time in town. So our city tour number 1 is the one to take if you want a quick orientation of the city, a good familiarization of the city.
So that would be the shorter one then?
That's the shortest one we have. It starts off at Dominion Square on Metcalfe and Dorchester. From there it goes into Old Montreal, where there is a guided tour of Notre Dame Church for approximately 20 minutes.
Do you get off the bus and go inside?
On this tour, yes. That's just about the only place you get off. There is an optional stop at the Wax Museum once they are headed up to Mount Royal, to the scenic lookout in Camillien Hood up there. It also goes by, of course, the Olympic Stadium. We explain all the different historical sites all around the island. There's about 200 points of interest in that particular tour. And the second one is tour number 2. It is called The City and the Mountain. It's called that because we have a train ride on top of the mountain. When we get to the top of Mount Royal, everyone gets off the bus there, and there's about a half hour they go up to the top, where there's a little restaurant, a scenic lookout.
Is this up to Beaver Lake?
No, it's higher than Beaver Lake, where you would not normally take the little train is only for the tourists.
More towards the cross.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly, up towards that area, and there's about a half hour or so that they take up there. It's quite nice going through the forest, up through the mountain in that little train. It's very pleasant, of course, if it's not raining.
Yeah, that helps.
They have closed trains, but sometimes they're not available. And the third one that we have, of course, is the City, the Mountain, and St. Joseph's Oratory. That includes a 1-hour stop at St. Joseph's, where there's a little time to have something to eat, and a tour of the oratory is available. In that, they explain everything that's inside of the oratory, how it got built, when it was founded, etc., etc.
Who's explaining this? Would it be one of the priests that's in the oratory?
Yes, someone that is hired by the city, by the oratory, to give these tours inside. Of course, our own bus driver is limited to the city tour itself. We also have an optional stop at the Wax Museum on the corner of Côte des Neiges and Queen Mary. That's up to the tourists themselves whether they want to go. It's an optional thing on the tour because it's extra. Our basic city tour cost is $9.50.
What happens if you have 13 people that don't want to go to the Wax Museum and 12 that do? How does that work?
What normally happens is the people that don't want to go just either stay on the bus, or we try to get an agreement between them. The driver guide himself will ask the people how they want to work it. And it usually works out pretty well, because the people who don't want to go into the Wax Museum will appreciate the 20-minute stop anyway to get up and stretch and walk around a little bit, and they can even walk up the street a little while where St. Joseph's Oratory is, just over to their left. And then they get back on the bus and off they go. It only takes about 20 minutes, half an hour.
So how much do they learn?
Is it
really effective?
I think they learn quite a bit. I think the person that comes to Montreal and has never been here before and takes one of our tours will learn quite a lot. And when he gets off that bus, or she gets off that bus, they can go to these places on their own. They'll know where east and west and south and north are without too much trouble.
So that's a good orientation.
It's a very, very good orientation. And you'd be surprised how many people come up and they only have 3 or 4 hours to stay in Montreal. They're coming through Montreal, going on to another city somewhere. And if they come by train, for example, they'll come to the Queen Elizabeth Hotel, which is right near Central Station, pick up one of our brochures, do a 2.5-hour tour. They know what Montreal is about, basically, then get back on their train and keep going. The people that are staying more than 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 days, then of course they have more time to take our other tours. We have a Laurentian tour, the Laurentian Mountains also, which is a 7.5-hour tour. That includes lunch, etc.
How would a bus tour in Montreal compare to, say, a bus tour in New York City? Obviously, we can go to the Laurentians. There's more to see, but is there more to it than that?
I think that our tours here in Montreal are very well organized, and as far as our guides are very well informed. There's a course that they have to follow. It takes almost a year in school, and the Montreal Catholic School Commission offers this course. They have to be licensed guides so that there's no misinterpretation of things. The dates are there. They know what they're saying. The people aren't lied to on the bus, as I have witnessed in a couple of other cities where the bus driver really didn't know too much about his city. He was more anxious to get the tour over with than showing the people on the bus about the city.
So would you recommend this to Montrealers?
That's one of the things that I was also very surprised at. the majority of Montrealers that I've spoken to don't know their own city. It's a tremendous thing to take a 2.5-hour city tour when you've lived here all your life and to find out that there are hundreds of places that you never even thought of.
Well, John, as soon as I can, I'm going to get on a bus tour.
Please do. You've been my guest.
We've been talking to John Arruda from Murray Hill. We'll be back with more on Montreal Inside Out in just a moment. Well, that's our show for this week. I'm Peter Garred.
And I'm Maria Monteferrante. Join us again next week for Montreal Inside Out.
Good afternoon. I'm Peter Garred.
And I'm Maria Monteferrante. Welcome to Montreal Inside Out. Montrealers love films, but we're no different from anywhere else when we cringe at the thought of gambling away $5 a shot at what could be the dog of the week. So, instead of cutting back on visits to the cinema, we've decided to cut our costs by seeing our favorite films in any of Montreal's fine repertory cinemas. Peter?
And while the MGM Lion may still be roaring with profits, we are also turning out en masse to listen to the roar of $80,000 engines at Montreal's own Formula Grand Prix. I'll listen more in just a moment.
Up next, Motor Madness in Montreal. Welcome back. Looking back at the theme of our show, we've tried to bring out the unique characteristics of our city.
And certainly one event that sets Montreal apart from any other city in Canada is its annual role as host of the Formula Grand Prix. This 3-day event, which spans one weekend in June, makes its presence known not only by the sudden upsurge in tourists, but also by the whine of Formula engines that can be heard from Anjou to NDG. We go trackside at the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve with our reporter, Tony D. Ray.
Nothing in the world of auto racing can rival the sheer excitement of a Grand Prix race witnessed at first hand. For the drivers, the race is a deadly serious business, but for the fans lining the track, it is a setting and a contagious excitement that makes the Grand Prix a superb international event.
The Grand Prix attracts some 30,000 out-of-town visitors to Montreal, injecting excitement and an estimated $7 million into the local tourist industry. During the pre-race week, action centers in downtown Montreal showcasing the Formula One drivers in a round of press conferences, disco parties, and this lunch hour parade traveling down St. Catherine Street.
The crowd's atmosphere influences your performance in these races?
No, I don't think from a racing driver's point of view when you're in the car that the public really has an influence. It's when you're outside of the car around and you're in the town like in Montreal that you can see what sort of people you're dealing with. And in Montreal I enjoy it very much because it's almost like a halfway ground between Europe and America.
Surrounded by the St. Lawrence River, over 100,000 spectators gather on Ile Notre Dame for the 3 days of time trials, non-Formula One races, and the World Championship race itself. Located on the original site of Expo 67, the Circuit Gilles Villeneuve traces the original service road around the island. A specially contoured racing surface and installation of safety barriers effected the transformation in 1978. Now, spectators wait for the cars to negotiate the circuit at an average speed of 170 kilometers per hour. With moments to go, 50 million TV viewers worldwide wait for the start of the race. During the race, the Formula One drivers have eyes for only one thing, the narrow strip of road ahead. But for the spectators, the grandstands aren't the only vantage points offering a personally satisfying view. For the spectators attending the Grand Prix, good weather is the best thing that could happen, because the name of the game is finding a good vantage point, and this usually involves walking. The media is provided with choice spots as close to the track as safety permits, and these locations are closed to the general public. But a bit of exercise in the form of legwork offers the race fan and camera buff exciting views of the changing action at different turns. Like any other large-scale event that attracts a great number of spectators, the Grand Prix generates its own share of waste and crowding. A small price to pay for hosting the world's super drivers in Montreal.
When the race is over and the cleanup crews have moved in, Montrealers can follow the rest of the Grand Prix season on TV. As Belcanza says, it's the next best thing to being there. For Montreal Inside Out, I'm Tony Dire.
My guest today is Miss Susan Payne, who's the Assistant General Manager for the Grand Prix Labatt du Canada. Susan, welcome to Montreal Inside Out.
Thank you.
You're very much involved with the organization of the Grand Prix. What goes into producing a race of that size?
My goodness, lots of time and energy. It's a
Where do
lot
you
of...
begin?
Where do you begin? Well, you start by getting a date on an international calendar from the Federation, which is based in Paris. And then once you've got a date to put on an event, you've got to find a site and sponsors and people to make it go, organize it, and away you go.
And what happens after that?
What happens after that, there's a lot involved. You've got to commercialize it, you've got to set up your spectator facilities, your grandstands, and your food concessions, souvenir programs, everything done ahead of time, your promotion, your marketing, your publicity, all that, festivities.
So what's your most difficult task then?
The most difficult task is making it all happen within the few seconds that everything has to run in. What with television involved and everything, everything is split second as far as your schedule is concerned. You've got 3 days of intense, perfect timing, scheduling that has to be done, you know, with thousands of people working at it.
What kind of problems would you encounter?
Well, last year, for instance, we had a power failure, so we were late. One of the generators on Ile Notre-Dame blew up, so that slight problem. What happens then is all your satellites are ready to roll for international TV, and nothing's happening. Things like that, various things. Accidents, unfortunately, would cause delays in the racing, but one year we had internal insurance problems. That caused delays. Various things can happen. Hopefully we've seen them all.
What about the track? What do you do to get that ready?
The track, we start working on the track in the wintertime. As soon as the ground is ready to work, we have to put up the installations that are taken down. While we're not using the track, the site is used as a park for the people to come and see. There's a flower festival and so on. So we've got to put up our spectator fences, our temporary installations, some of the grandstands, the food, restaurant concessions, souvenir concessions, things like that.
How is the Grand Prix in Montreal, when it's held at the Circuit Villeneuve, how would it compare to the Grand Prix that it would be held in Mosport?
How would it compare in what sense?
Well, what's the setup? What's different about it?
Well, we don't have a permanent track. We have to get ready to host, and we have to host the event itself as well as the spectators. Whereas Mosport is all year round. They have their permanent bleachers and permanent installations. That's the basic difference. The other difference is Montreal is probably more attractive to have this type of an event because of you're right downtown. Within 2 seconds you cross the bridge and you've got restaurants, hotels, and everything that's attractive to the spectators who come and the people who come from overseas, the journalists and the competitors.
What about the racers themselves and the drivers' teams? How do they feel about our track?
They love it.
Why?
Because Montreal's an exciting place, because they've got a lot to do when they're not on the track. They're here, they arrive in Montreal normally a week before the event. So they've got time to sightsee and visit what we've got to offer. And they love it. They say that the people here are very friendly and cheerful, and they think it's one of the best ones they come to. Or so they say.
So what can we look for in 1984?
Hopefully as good weather as we had last year, and good competition, and perhaps what would be nice is to get some local talent up in Formula 1 so that not only can we host a good event, but we can show a Canadian.
One factor that was a topic of discussion when the Grand Prix first came here back 5 or 6 years ago was the noise factor. People, residents of St. Lambert and the surrounding areas, certainly found it very loud. How did you cope with that?
I think it's a matter of people getting used to it. We haven't, the noise has not reduced any, but we limit the engine trials to certain hours during the day so that the noise is restricted to a certain period. But people are sort of getting used to it. They realize it only lasts for 3 days out of the year, and it's not so bad.
Well, Susan, thanks very much for coming by. We'll be back with more on Montreal Inside Out after this. Up next, nostalgia at Repertoire Cinemas. Welcome back. Repertoire cinemas have long been the gathering place for students and people who otherwise could not afford to see films regularly. Maria?
Today, rather than limit ourselves to first-run theaters, more Montrealers are choosing to watch their favorite films at the reps, whether it's because of the lower prices, the range of film selection, or just the atmosphere in general. Fiona Downey has this report on Montreal's alternative cinemas.
Repertory cinema.
Hi, this is the Seville Theatre, built in the grand old style of the 30s, mostly for vaudeville-type acts. The place used to fill up with people who came to see all international stars. And as time rolled along, we moved into just cinema, and now, of course, we're a repertory theatre and have been for about 8 years.
What you're looking at here are the remains of the Empress Theatre. It was built in the 20s around the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb, also known as King Tut. In the late 40s, early 50s, it was converted into a supper club, and in the late 50s, early 60s, it was converted into 2 theaters, which showed first-run movies. It is now a repertory theater, which opened in the early 70s.
The difference between the Outremont cinema and the other French cinema in Montreal is that the cinema just offer to the public first-run film and rerun film. The Cinéma Outremont was built in 1929 by an architect called Emmanuel Breffy.
The Monkland Theatre is a landmark theatre in Montreal because of its incredible beauty. The interesting thing about this theatre is that when people came here as kids in the 30s and 40s, they can now bring their children here to see films.
The repertory cinemas are good because any movies that are in other theaters that you miss, at least you get to see them.
It's cheaper and they're better movies.
I do come a lot because I like films quite a bit.
Programming movies involves choosing the films that people want to see, playing them at the time that optimizes the amount of people that will come and see them, making sure there's a variety of things to see, that you appeal to different elements of the audience.
Price has a lot to do with why people come to reps. We also offer subscription cards where people who are real regulars and film buffs can get a really good discount.
I don't come here often enough to buy a pass.
You like? No, I haven't, because I run a busy schedule, so.
No, I never bought a pass. No, it's immaterial.
No, I never buy a pass.
No, I don't have a movie pass.
kind of get the feeling sometimes people like to come here, to be seen here, especially when you get DOA or any of the other kinds. They sort of gather outside and sort of mingle. It's kind of a social area, I guess. I love it. It's cheap, and you know, you meet up with a lot of people you know, and it's great.
Thank you.
We don't really have any competition as far as the first run is concerned. First run theaters aren't our competition. They're another game altogether.
At the Lowe's Theatre, they don't affect us whatsoever at all. They're not in direct competition. We've made the money that we needed to make, for example, while it was playing here. Yeah, they're good. They're good, but it doesn't affect us at all. Well, actually, I very rarely go to first runs. I went to a first run recently because, well, my mother was paying. But
repertory, for starters, is like anti-inflation. It's very economical, and they always have movies for a major majority of interest, you know, like, I mean, it's not a certain kind of crowd that just goes to a repertory theater. I mean, it's not because it's DOA that there's just going to be punks there. There's going to be all kinds.
I don't buy a pass at repertory cinemas.
Rocky Horror.
She's 184.
Cult films are, although many producers have tried to make a cult films are magical experience. They either happen or they don't. There's no way of predicting them. Casablanca is a cult film, but then again, so is Rocky Horror, so is Dawn of the Dead. They can't be created, they have to happen. Well, cult films are always good for a repertory theater because that's our business, is to play what the people really want to see.
What's the difference between seeing a film at a first-run theater or repertory cinema? Obviously, a lot more than $2. Do you ever buy a pass at any of the reps?
Yeah.
Yes?
Good afternoon and welcome back. My guest today is Mr. Ricky Friedman, who's the director of the Monkland Cinema and one of the original founders of Cinema 5. Welcome to the show.
Hi.
Can you tell us about how you started back then with Cinema 5 and how long ago was it?
Yeah, it was 1975. How I started with Cinema 5? Well, I was working in the investment business at the time and loved going to movies, and was sitting around with a friend of mine one evening talking about it. Went to the Outremont to see what the Outremont was doing, and
were
we
they
thought
a repertory then?
Yeah, they were a repertory since 72 or 73. And we decided that perhaps there should be one in the English side of Montreal. So we went around looking for a building and found the Cinema 5.
And that's how it started?
Yeah, that's how it started.
What types of films were you showing then?
All kinds of films, classics. Most of these films hadn't been shown in Montreal except for the Outremont and their small first-run showing back in the 70s. I guess a film would come for 3-4 weeks and then go away and maybe 5 years later appear on TV, which is quite a bit different now. But we had this whole store of films to play for at least the first number of years that we were there, so it's all kinds of films.
What type of an audience were you aiming? Like, what type of a marketing strategy did you have? Or was there one?
There wasn't really one. It was to try and get, I guess, people more interested in films, more aware of films, so it's everybody.
It was just
we had films for all, for 14, for 18, all kinds of films, really for all kinds of people.
I see. And now? What are the reps like? Do they still have that same type of attitude where it's just for everybody?
Oh yeah, I think so. It has to be. It's not a huge city. It's not New York or LA that we're living in, so we have to have a very general outlook at the film
But there's a
audience.
lot of them now. It's not like before where there was just, basically there was Cinema 5, now there's Seville.
There was Outremont and Cinema 5, and now there's probably 10 or 12 places, you know, including Concordia and Cinémathèque Québécoise.
And what are the differences between them?
Not a whole lot, really not a whole lot. We more or less show the same films. We attempt to bring films to Montreal that haven't played anywhere else, so that perhaps each individual theater will eventually come up with a first run from time to time. But most of the time we're
How do
we're
you go
playing the
about
same
getting
films.
a film?
There's distributors in Toronto and Montreal. They're quite easy to obtain any film just about in the world and in our market, you know, between Toronto and Montreal. Toronto being a major film center in the world.
And what about a first-run film? Obviously, that's more difficult.
Yeah, Canada's a closed community when it comes to that. There's two major chains that really have a monopoly, I guess we could use the word, over all first-run product that comes to Montreal. Any that the repertories get is because they said, no thanks, I don't want it.
What about French repertories?
Well, French, it's another market from what I've been doing. It's centered at the Outremont and the Ouimetoscope. It's perhaps a much more interesting market than the English one in Montreal because there's 1.5 million French-speaking people and, I don't know, what is it, 400,000 or 500,000 English in Montreal now. So
What type of films do they play? The same?
Same thing. Their bread and butter films are big blockbuster films dubbed into French. Really, so it's
They would be the films
not
that
too
you would
much
have.
different, yeah. Except the French market in Montreal is more receptive to European films, German films, and films from France than the English market is totally
Are they
almost
successful
unreceptive. Very, yeah. Very.
And in English?
Oh yeah, they've always been successful. They wouldn't still be here. Cinema 5 wouldn't still be around 8 years if it wasn't successful. And the Seville's been 7 years, and the Monkland just opened in November. And theaters tend to go away quickly if they aren't successful.
How do you compete with each other? Besides the films, do you have, there's some with passes and
Yeah, I
special
guess
99
it's
cents?
passes, prices for senior citizens, and it's mostly the films, trying to get films, the best films available.
How does scheduling play a part in that?
It plays a part. It would play a part as to who would play a film before the other theater, and that's just a matter of
I mean, within the
when you're scheduling themselves, when
But within the theater, like, what type of a film do you decide to play on a Friday night or a Saturday night?
Oh, that's after experience of who comes, but you got to play for the weekends. You have to program the theater for the weekends because that's when 75% of your audience is going to come no matter what happens. Monday to Thursday is a much quieter time.
See.
So,
what do you see for the future of repertory cinemas?
I see that
Are they
repertory theaters will always, I think, there'll always be a market for the serious film goer, but there's some competition that wasn't there in 1975,
Which is?
Mostly from video movies and video cassette recorders. There, you know.
Because now they get them at home.
Oh, sure, and even less expensively than repertory theaters can show them to you, and before repertory theaters can play them. So that's an interesting side to the film market now.
But there's always the atmosphere
Oh
of
yeah,
going.
you're not going to get the big old theater at home, and you're not going to get a big screen for quite a few years yet.
So I think that's what's going to keep you alive.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank you for joining us
Okay,
today,
sure.
and
Thank
I
you.
hope that the things really get moving, because reps play a really interesting part in cinema. My guest today was Mr. Ricky Friedman, and we'll be back with more right after this.
One of the advantages to repertoire theaters is the number of films that are shown over a 2-month period, almost as many as 150. Maria?
Unfortunately, other entertaining events only come once a year, like the Grand Prix.
I'm Peter Garred.
And I'm Maria Monteferrante. Join us again next week for another edition of Montreal Inside Out.